Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the replay of the July 1st Masterclass. It is July 1, a new month, a fresh start. And today we are going to talk about why great communicators get first shot opportunities at leadership. I have been extraordinarily blessed in my career. I and just wrote it in school earlier today. Somebody wanted to know, have you ever had that moment when you made a decision and you realized it changed your entire life? And the moment that I mentioned was one that I thought that would work great in the masterclass. Um, I was in a 2-year internship in college, and when my internship ended suddenly because HR figured out that my boss still had hired me after a summer and it was 2 years later and they didn't catch me, um, they told me I was out of there. And my boss said, "No, no, 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 no. You offer her a job. I don't care what it is. Make her a nuclear engineer. I don't care. But you've got to offer her something." And they gave me a choice. They gave me a choice of being a customer service rep, which had a very distinctive, and this was in a public utility, so it had a very distinctive career path for how you started on the phones and you worked your way up to supervisor. And it was, over X years, this happens and the money and all that other stuff. And then there was a chance to be a receptionist in HR. And I thought, you know what? If I take the receptionist job, I'm going to start at the bottom because I had a very prestigious internship and, and I went to a high-end women's college and so I was the little prissy girl in some people's opinions. So I started at the bottom in a job where I would create my own path. There wasn't a path made for me, and it depended upon my ability. Now, I knew that I had gotten a degree in communications and sociology, and I knew I wanted to go into marketing, and I figured I'm going to get there. Let's just focus on the primary gift you have, which is communication. And that's what I did. And I made my own path. I made my own career. I'm now on my sixth business of my own. And it's because I chose the path to maximize my skills. And the skill that I maximized was communications. Communications is a key tool in the leadership toolbox. It is not charisma. It's not your fancy suit. It's not all of those other things that people say, oh, well, leaders are XYZ. It has all to do with communications and how you relate to people, how you process decisions, how you communicate those decisions, and how you move forward with that. So that's what I want to talk about today, the 5 communications tools that really put you in a stellar position to be selected for leadership opportunities, whether that's on the board of directors, whether that's in a company, whether that's leading your own team, leading your clients in their futures. It all comes down to 5 things. And the very first thing is, and you're going to get tired of hearing this, but it is so true, point first communication. Yes, I'm at the point now where when I say, you know what I'm going to say, you're all going to say in unison, point first communication. Intelligence is second to clarity every single time. It doesn't matter how smart you are. It doesn't matter what big words you use. What matters is if people can understand you. And so as a leader, it is critical that people understand what you're saying and that they listen to you. If you don't use point first communication, leadership and listening are going to become way down on the list. If you're rambling, if you're talking all the time, if you're building up to what you're going to say, if you explain it, then you explain how you explained it so you can explain it again before you tell me what you think, that is not going to get you anywhere, because people are going to shut down from a listening standpoint. They're not going to want to keep listening to you drone on and on and on. So point first communication. Can people tell me the 4 steps of point first communication? I'll start. The first one is start with the point first. That was the easy one. Does anyone remember the second one? Miss Dee
Brief
Dee.
explanation.
Yes, thank you, lady. You got it. A brief.
And then action items, and then stop.
Yes. Gold star for Dee Dee Lee today. Exactly. You start with the point first. I recommend plan B. Not, well, plan A has a lot of merit, and plan C is something that we tried before. But personally, I was sort of thinking that maybe B might be the best choice. No, I recommend plan B. I recommend it because of X, Y, and Z. The action items are, Vic, I need you to do this. Dee Dee, I need you to do that. And we need to have, and I'm going to do that, do the other thing. We'll all be done by Friday, and then stop talking. So point first communication, always number one. Number two, and this isn't something we've really talked about in the past, but I would appreciate your perspectives on this. And it ties into point first communication to some degree, but it talks about the first sentence sets the authority of the conversation. So if you get into a conversation and you start just, I'm starting a meeting. Now, when we start the masterclass, we always jibber jabber until we get a couple people here, until 5 after, unless we have a lot of people to start. That is being social. But there's a point where we have to stop and say, okay, we're going to start now. Starting a meeting, starting with, again, the point in mind. Here's what we're going to accomplish today. What would success look like if we wanted to move our budget to school instead of Facebook? Asking the question, making the statement, that sets the authority and the direction for the conversation. For a presentation, hitting them with something compelling, whether it's a story that then gives them a punch, or whether it's another compelling question. Setting the authority with the very first statement that you make is the sign of a great leader. They're not wasting time. They're getting you in the right frame of mind and the right track from the start. Excuse me, more vodka.
People are going to believe you on that.
Nah. No, you've all seen me drink wine on the lifeboat call. You know that I'd be giggling. The third tip for the third communication skill for leadership is being calm. Had this conversation with one of my clients yesterday. Calmness equals confidence in many people's brains. Emotional steadiness is really important as a leader. Whether you are having to give someone a disciplinary action, whether you have to talk about budget cuts that are going to impact layoffs, impact programs. If you're talking to someone who's just upset, sitting across the table and crying with them is not always the answer. Uh, Years ago, I was running a department at a printing company, and the company decided to go back to its core service of printing, and they eliminated my department. Well, God bless him, my boss had the conversation with me that we were going to be closing the department at the end of the year. And he cried through the entire presentation or the entire meeting. Now, I appreciate his heart, but that was not a time where I should have been passing him tissues and consoling him. I kept my emotions together because, excuse me, it was a business situation that was appropriate for me to stay calm and emotionally steady. Then I could get in the car and cry later. But, being calm and emotionally steady is really important. There is a time to come alongside your team and show emotion, but overall, being the calm rock is really where the leader needs to be. And that is a communication skill because it's not always easy to not become emotional when this is impacting people's jobs, impacting programs that impact other people and employees. So it's important to keep it together. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for saying this because I think this is a really important piece. And what I notice about me is when there is like leadership pressure or a crisis going on or whatever, I notice that I get a little more breathy when I speak and
Mhm,
I speak faster. And I
mhm.
was wondering if we have some techniques that we can use in order to, like, if you're obviously trying to maintain versus maintaining or being calm, I'm like, what do you use to calm your vocabulary down? Because I think when you speak calmly, the whole room will calm down. But if
Exactly.
you're not calm, it doesn't happen. So how do we what are some of the things we can do for that?
Well, and first I wanna say you're absolutely right. By being calm, you are maintaining the environment. If you start getting hyper or you become angry or you become emotional, that opens the door to tell other people it's okay to be angry or emotional. So, maintaining calm definitely affects the environment. In terms of what to do, I always recommend breathing. Before you start, a nice big breath just to calm your heart. Um, a breath will also calm the nerve centers in your brain. Just a deep breath, one single deep breath can make those changes. Sometimes you need to take more than one. Um, you don't want to breathe like my mom does when she's trying to take a deep breath because she'll normally go, my camera there. Um, it, just keeping it. And sometimes you may need to do that in the middle of the conversation, and that's okay. But the breath is the most calming tool from a communication standpoint. You brought up another very good point, and that is speaking quickly. When people are not calm, they have a tendency to speak quickly. The problem with that is that, first of all, it triggers uncertainty. When you're talking quickly, people have a tendency to think you're nervous. And then the brain starts playing games. Well, what are they nervous about? Do they not trust what they're saying? Are they a credible person? Um, so it's important to maintain the pace that you speak. And sometimes that's just a matter of telling yourself. And you may find that you speed it up again. Breath, slow down. And sometimes that means saying to other people as well as yourself, I'm sorry, I'm talking too fast here. Let me just slow down for a minute. So taking ownership of that, taking ownership of the pace that you have. I've done the same thing when I get upset. I don't talk faster, I talk slower.
Mm.
And it is extremely annoying to people. Not that that's why I do it. No, but I do. I have a tendency to calm myself so much to the point that I start speaking too slowly. And it is annoying to people. And depending on the situation, that's not what you want to do. You don't want to add fuel to the fire. So I have to tell myself to speed up. Yes, Dee Dee.
Being dyslexic, when I get really, really emotional, it's hard for me to talk at all. It just there's a disconnect between where my language is stored and what I'm sensating. And that's I just shut up, because what comes out is and these broken sentences that are absolutely terrible.
Well, and I didn't realize that, but that makes sense. That makes sense that would happen. And in that case, then it goes back to taking that breath to calm yourself.
Mhm.
Because when you calm yourself, then you'll get back into being verbal.
Yeah, I usually do, and then everybody's jumping on me. What? Well, say what you're gonna say, and then you're just like, ah!
Well, you need to take another breath.
Yes.
So being calm, very, very important. Being emotionally steady. The fourth one is, yes, ma'am.
I just want to say what Dee Dee said is very important because um, that's the pay scale right there. Most people, if they have any kind of ADHD, any neuro thing that happens, this is the point where you can level up in such a way that if you can handle that kind of stress or you handle those things, that's, the 6, the 7-figure, the 8-figure. It's like the more that you can lead and in that calm way and not react how you usually react, that's a skill set that you kind of have to practice like a boot camp. So it's like you have to catch yourself over and over. But what I wanted to say is that's the difference in the leadership call. So if anyone else is listening right now, the difference in 5 to 6 to 7 figures is the key point that you just made. And it's like once the stress goes up, it's how you handle that stress that's going to determine the outcome of the business that's being moved. And I think the practice of that is catching yourself at how you do what you do. So for me, I'm like you, I speed up, I don't slow down. And I have to force myself to slow down. And I have to watch myself. You have to be super present to command the skill set that you're sharing with us. And that skill set to me it is like it is the top skill set right there. That one that we just are talking about, this ability to hold yourself and control yourself, be aware of yourself while being present with what's happening in a situation that could be stressful for everyone. And I think, like, imagine if you were in a building when 9/11 happened, or imagine when you were in a building if it caught fire. It's like it's not just with your clients or negotiating or landing the scale. This type of leadership has to be right there. And if you have it, you have like a 1% skill set, like top 1% skill set.
Absolutely. And you think about people like Sir Richard Branson, who have dyslexia and have ADD, and who didn't have a high school diploma. And what he overcame, obviously he had some gumption to drop out of school and to move forward and be the success that he has become, which included a lot of failures, which included a lot of conversations with people saying, hey, I'm sorry, the company's closing, I'm laying off, this doesn't exist anymore. But he is a beautiful case study on leadership and communication skills, in spite of some of the challenges that he has had to overcome. And he still has dyslexia and he still has ADHD. And
But that's the thing he concentrated on. He concentrated on getting good at communication skills. He talks about that all the time,
Yeah.
not just verbal, but written as well.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Excellent point. So to summarize where we are of the 5, the first one is point first. The second one is the first sentence leads the authority. The third is calm leadership. The fourth is compelling questions. That is a huge communications tool, because great leaders don't look to do the most talking. They look to ask the questions. They engage, they get other people involved. And by asking the right questions and compelling questions to get people to think outside of the box, they become great leaders. They come up with ideas that other people haven't come up with before. They engage their team and try to engage everyone in their team by getting them to think this way. So whether it's a question starting a meeting of what do we want to accomplish today? What would it look like if we? What would success look like if we? And that includes just everyday conversation questions as well, to make sure that the listener stays engaged in the dialogue, because conversation should be a dialogue, not a monologue. So questions like, am I making sense? What do you think about that? Those types of questions go a long way in conversation, whether they are the leader questions in terms of meetings or teams, or whether they are just engagement questions. Because in this day of noise and interruptions, and my phone, which I actually don't have with me at this moment, but people are thinking about the phone that just vibrated in their hand. Staying focused in a conversation is really tough. And so to do that, you need to make sure it's a dialogue. And if you are one of those people who talks constantly, especially if as a listener, you're one that doesn't like to interrupt, so you wait for them to take a breath so you can jump in. It's so much easier if they say, what do you think about that? Have you ever experienced that? Am I making sense? things like that really go a long way from a communication standpoint and a leadership standpoint. And the fifth one, and most importantly, from a leadership standpoint, in my opinion, because it embraces all of these things and so much more, is that executive presence is the communication skill of leaders. So many people think executive presence is the nice suit or the person who's really charismatic or whatever. That's not the case. And you don't have to be a leader. You don't have to have a leadership title to be a leader. You want to make sure that your presentation, both physically, mentally, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, is all aligned so that you are singularly focused when you're communicating. Your brain is not thinking about what you're going to have for lunch and what you're going to go, the errands you're running after work. You want to make sure that you're incorporating the four things that we've talked about: the point first, the steady emotions and calm, hold on, what was the second one? Oh, the first sentence that sets your authority. When all else fails, bring your notes. And asking great questions. Those are all wrapped into executive presence, and specifically other just great communication skills, like pauses, like listening, like body language. Did the two of you have a chance to see? I believe you both commented on the body language video that Robin shared with me that I put on school. You know, that 90-second video spoke volumes, I think, in terms of body, face, smile, tone, eye contact. All of those things tie into executive presence. And what, ultimately, executive presence, think about someone that you know. Who would you describe in your sphere who has great executive presence? Yes, Dee Dee.
I'm sorry to say, but executive presence is always something I've admired very much. But nowadays, it's really, everything's very sloppy. There are very few people I see, and I mean, they're always slouching over, and there's nothing executive about them.
Who do you know that's it? Who would you say that you know that's got that executive presence?
Or had it
Um,
in your past?
Yeah.
yeah, and I'm looking.
Tony Robbins comes to mind for me. Tony
Mhm.
Robbins has executive presence all the time. He's
Yeah.
quite
Mhm.
the leader. It's really he embodies
I don't know who Tony Robbins is.
Mhm. But
So,
who in your past, Dee Dee?
yeah, I'm sitting there looking, and Steve Jobs is the only one I could have thought of. Steve Jobs, or uh, yeah, that's about it. That's about
I
it
think
that I can
Steve
think of.
Jobs is a good one, although a lot of people said he was a prick and hard to work with. He still led the company
And
in
he had
that.
that when he was on stage, when he was doing things, he had a good executive presence.
Yes.
Although he didn't always use point first. A lot of times he did, but sometimes he went way off with the explanation and story beforehand. But
Mhm.
and he would lose me. So, but yeah, there wasn't many. Even the university president And, a lot of the professors or deans of the university had horrible communication skills.
Mhm.
Well, a lot of people do.
Mhm. It's absolutely true. And one of the things that amaze me is the people who have succeeded with such poor communication skills. One person that I would say with executive presence is only because we were just talking about him is Sir Richard Branson. In his blue jeans and his denim shirts and his little bit of a slouch, he still rocks the room. And and that's a classic example of, you don't have to have the power suit, although, he looks great in a power suit, but he spends more of his time in casual. But
As
he's a leader.
as a woman example, I think Michelle Obama has great presence, and so does Oprah Winfrey. And I
Yes.
think the commanding presence Oprah Winfrey has is amazing.
Yes. I agree. I absolutely agree. She is, I think Michelle has a lot of poise and good
Mhm.
communication, but Oprah Winfrey she has executive presence in spades and is a stellar communicator.
Yes.
And so did Maya Angelou. I mean, she's reading a poem and the entire room stops, and she really presences herself when she's
Mhm.
speaking.
Yes.
Yeah, and I like your explanation, because for me there is a difference between Oprah Winfrey and Michelle Obama. I see Michelle Obama as having class and a sense of respect and dignity, but I don't see her as a great leader. And
But
partially
she's a
because,
great speaker, and we're talking about communications versus leadership. She's
yeah,
excellent at
well, her
communicating.
point was, who would I say was a great leader? and and I feel Oprah Winfrey, and I feel that openness that Oprah Winfrey, the acceptance, the openness that Oprah Winfrey exudes when she's giving executive presence. It doesn't feel as judgmental as other people would.
Yeah, I think that Winfrey, and I had the opportunity to work with her multiple times when she was in the Baltimore TV station
Mhm.
before she was Oprah, and when she was Oprah Winfrey. um, and even then, and when you're the in the whether it's the arts or specifically in the news industry, where you have to start small. You start at that little TV or radio station, and then you work your way up to the next market and the next market, and then if you're talented and blessed, you become Oprah, and her empire. Um, but she really always came across as very down to earth, as well as leading. She is not a person who, as nice as she comes across, you would never want to cross her, not because you've ever seen her be nasty, but she is a leader. She has a very commanding presence in yet a warm way. And that's something else I'd like to touch on, as we talk about leadership communication. And I have a client who, um, culturally is not warm. That is just not how she was raised. Nicest person. It doesn't have anything to do with being nice. It has to do with just that is not the way she was raised. She's very much to herself. She doesn't want to get involved, and
Mhm.
and that can come off as very standoffish. And from a leadership perspective and an executive presence perspective, that is a problem, because warmth plus authority equals trust. If you are warm and gushy all the time, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have authority. And if you have authority, that doesn't necessarily mean that you are a warm person. But if you can marry the two, that is a very powerful combination. And what the conversation I was having with her yesterday, and actually, um, someone else I know, and this is going way back in his career, very talented at what he did, and went in for performance review after his first 6 months or year or whatever it was. And his boss told him, he said, "You are stellar. You are phenomenal at what you do. But I'm going to have to let you go because nobody here likes you. And teamwork is important to me." And he said, "Give me 1 month and I will turn it around. So let's have this conversation in 30 days and give me another chance." And in 30 days, he turned it around. And he turned it around simply by, instead of being to himself, he wasn't gossiping, he wasn't in anybody's face, he just was to himself. People assumed he was aloof and standoffish. So they didn't like him. So he started doing things like saying good morning and asking people how their weekend was, and remembering that they had a kitten named Mittens, and going to get a cup of coffee and asking if they wanted me to pick up one for you while I'm there. Those little things. So even if you have to, if you are not inherently a warm person, you can do things as simple as that where people have interest. People think that you are interested in them. And people love to talk about themselves. That is their favorite topic in the entire world. I'm better now, and Dee Dee, I see your finger. I'll be right there. I'm better now, but when I was in the corporate world, particularly as someone who got into the corporate world when she was 20, so I was young, I was inexperienced, and I was pretty in an all-male environment at an electric utility. So that put me at a disadvantage because I was the cute little one. "Honey, would you do that for me? Honey, would you get this for me?" That's just the environment that I put myself in. And I addressed that again with my communication skills because I would be interested in everybody. I would know the names of their kids. I would do that. I would ask them. And they all thought that I was very nice and very good at what I did. And then someone would say, "Well, tell me something about Karen." They knew nothing about me because I never talked about myself. I always talked about them. And that gave the impression to them that I was very interesting and very open. So perception is 9/10 of reality. Dee Dee, what were you going to say?
I was going to say that leadership from the Roman times forward, all through lords and ladies and so on, had to do with being of service to mankind, being of service to the community, being of service, which meant that you had to have warmth and care.
Mhm.
That, it used to be when a company was going to lay off an employee because they were closing a department, they would go and question all their other business friends to see if they might have a position for them.
Mhm.
Now, there is no service. It's just, well, you're gone. You're a bad egg now,
Mhm.
and therefore we can see in that the lack of leadership and the lack of care.
Mhm.
And I think that one of the things that really belong to an executive presence is that you have to care for the situation. You have to care for the people. You have to care for the environment. You have to care for the company, things like that. Without care, I don't think you can really be an executive presence. You just are an
I
authority figure.
I think that's a key component in terms of being a caring or compassionate person. Um, the only challenge with that is making sure that you maintain your emotional steadiness.
Yes, the
Yeah.
calmness. Yes. Yeah, you
There's
can care and be calm.
yes, Vicky.
I'd like to share that I think one of the important things about executive presence, and this happened to me, this was really happened to me, the executive presence, you have to make yourself not fall into the habits that you have when you concentrate because you look angry. And the thing is, you may not feel angry, but I think communication starts right here. And
Mhm.
then secondarily, it starts right there. And I want to say I learned this from you, and we practiced this the whole time. We did the coffee break show, and what I know started climbing. So she was the executive producer of the coffee break show when we were doing the coffee break show. And what happened was she was like, Vicky, you have to smile. And sometimes when we were on, she'd be like, so you could do it. So I literally make it a practice, even when I'm a student, like I am right now, or if I'm leading or in that position, I make sure that I'm smiling because that attitude, it comes through. It's that warmth that you were talking about. And what I used to do when I concentrate, and even now, when I write books or I'm not on screen, I do this.
Mhm.
I just happen to, that's just who I am. These are not smokers' lines, they're lines
Mhm.
that, and coffee drinking lines. But this, and you can see that I'm focusing, but it looks pretty angry. So I spend a lot of focus on that. And I want to know kind of what, I mean, I shared that with you, but what I want to know is if you're new and you're like maybe English is your second language or something like that, in order to create the executive presence, what are the three things? I mean, I know I'm not just talking about talking, but focusing on the whole experience that somebody is going to receive from you by your expressions or anything else. And I do it now. I try to, because what I noticed naturally is my dad had this. Do you see the smile?
Mhm.
It's upside down. It
That's right.
just is. And that's why I'm like this. I always do this because this is friendly. This is who I am. And this is a birth defect. It's not my fault. So, maybe I could have surgery to make the smile up like this, but you have to figure out how are you being received completely. And I'm like, if you're looking for executive presence, what are the three key things that you're looking for? What I know that communication skills is one, and maybe attitude is number two. But like, what are the top three things you think, even ESL speakers, just everybody, what are the top three things?
And I am prepared for that because that was the final place I was going. And I know it doesn't directly apply to the two of you on this call today, but I know it will apply to some of the replay listeners. From an ESL standpoint, executive presence is not beyond reach by any means because it doesn't have to do with what language you speak. As a matter of fact, one of our newest school members, who is from Colombia, wanted to know if there was a difference between English communication and Spanish communication, being a great communicator in English versus being a great communicator in Spanish. And my answer was no, that while there are some cultural differences, perhaps, in terms of personal space, in terms of emotion, still the points are the same. First and foremost, you've got to be clear, and that is not just with pronunciation. Um, having an accent is exotic and wonderful, and if you have one, I think that's fantastic. You can learn to speak clearly and enunciate and still have your accent, and that is first and foremost. So clarity is first and foremost. The second would be structure. Now, structure can be both point first communication, but the bottom line is that you need to have a beginning, a middle, and an end in your conversation. So it doesn't matter what language you're speaking, it doesn't matter if you have an accent or not. You need to have structure in your communication. And the third thing that you need to have, I would say, if I had to prioritize, is the pace of your conversation, particularly for ESL speakers. I think it's very important that pace, if you are speaking English as a second language, that your pace be a little slower than culturally you are accustomed to speaking. And that is because of your accent. But you can still be a native English speaker and speak way too fast for people to understand you. So you need to maintain a pace and pause that makes sense. So I think that as ESL speakers with executive presence, while the first 5 things I talked about with the point first communication, the first sentence as your authority, the calm demeanor and steady emotion, the asking the compelling questions, and hold on. Oh yeah, executive presence. This is why you keep notes with you, people. That's why you keep notes with you. And the executive presence. I think it's important, and I'll be right there. I think it's important that ESL speakers add 3 things to that, and that is specifically slowing down, enunciation, and just focusing on being clear. And that is with structure in your conversation. Yes, Vicki.
I wanted to share also in the executive presence, I know from my professional career as a speaker, there are some things you do to get your next speaking gig. And one is that you're very good with the person who's putting on the event itself. And because they know every hotel event person ever or conference event person ever, and they talk to each other. And the number one thing they want to look at is what you would call executive presence. But what they say is, can this speaker hold an audience? If they can't hold an audience, your name goes everywhere. So that executive presence is a big thing. And if they're like, yeah, they held the audience really well, then your next gig is really easy. You're going over to this conference and speaking over here, and going to this conference and speaking over here, because they're talking to each other. The conference people, they do that so much. And if you look at all the really great speakers, like when you were talking, I was thinking of Jack Canfield,
Mhm.
who is, he can hold a room and he has this presence that's so calming and so inviting. And when you listen to him speak, the speed by which he does the pauses, he is absolutely, when you were talking today about everything, he is the absolute, just, he is so key in that. He's so good. I just
He is.
wanted to share that.
Yeah, he is. Dee Dee?
You know, while we're talking about this, I thought about, the executive presence, and one of the most commanding that I've ever met was Helmut Schmidt. And Helmut Schmidt was the chancellor in Germany for a long period of time. And he then took over a newspaper called Die Zeit, the Times. And he had such a presence that when he spoke, everybody wanted them there. He smoked, he drank, he snuffed tobacco, And every single news channel and everything would allow him to do that while he was talking because he had such powerful statements. And they would put him on these roundtables with all these politicians talking about something. And then they'd finally ask him his opinion. And he would come out with exactly that: point, reasons, action, cut. And what he said just was like a razor knife that would just cut everybody else's conversation out and make it look not well thought out. And he commanded such a presence. And I haven't seen anybody like that since, but it was in German. So
Mhm.
I'm so sorry.
No, that's fine. Thank you, Vicki.
I have a question. The point, the authority sentence, the compelling questions, the things, on the newscasts, how today to discuss this, we have this person, then this person, then this person, and
Mhm.
they're like, we're going to start with this person. When the newscaster asks the question, is this the form, the 4-point system that you would use? Make this statement, blah, 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 and then stop. And then is that the system you would use as far as being interviewed? Excuse me.
From an interview standpoint, that's always what I do because it's important to stay focused and keep it concise, particularly if it's a broadcast interview, because now we're talking about speaking in seconds as opposed to minutes. But yes, you definitely want to, and point first works well in that. And when
You
they
know,
edit,
I saw I'm so sorry. I saw ABC News interview you
Mhm,
when your book was released,
mhm.
and I was I want to go watch that. I mean, it was a good interview, and I'm like, there's the example of it, and uh, I'm just learning that I think I need to concentrate more on that because I get interviewed along, but I can be long winded. I could be Joe Biden. You know how they used to say they'd ask Joe Biden a question 20 minutes, 30 minutes later, he'd be done answering it.
Yeah, well, but it depends on the forum. I mean, if you're doing a roundtable, then then you can delve in as deep as you want. If you are on broadcast news or you're in some other timed venue where
Mhm.
you're talking in seconds and not minutes, it makes a difference to know exactly what you want to say before you open your mouth because
Yeah.
um, otherwise you make it difficult. And I've done this before. When I was in college, we had to do interviews and we had to edit them and all that stuff. Um, and it's tough if somebody is not a point first communicator or doesn't lead with a point because it's difficult to edit when they're doing this with their
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah.
And there was one person that when I edited, normally you would edit from the beginning of the conversation to the end, and you would edit out the superfluous stuff and you would just tighten it
Mhm.
up. This
Yeah.
person literally, you went to 3 minutes in for the first segment, and then you went to 30 seconds in for the second segment, and then 2 minutes in for the third segment. And you had to bounce around
Mhm.
in their interview to get a cognitive end result.
Yeah.
So it does make a difference when you know what you want to say first, when you've thought about it in advance before you walk into that meeting, before you get on that call, um, before you step on that stage, and know what you want to say and why you want to say it. The why is always important. And if you haven't read the book recently, I'm sure you've both read it, but Simon Sinek's book really makes a huge, huge impact. I just reread that last year for the first time in decades. And it hit me as strongly last year as it did when I read it when the book first came out in, gosh, what was it, the 80s maybe, or the 90s. But the bottom line is that communications is the number one life skill. It impacts every aspect of our lives, personally, professionally. People don't wake up to say, I want to be a better communicator today. They wake up and say, I want to make more money today. I want to lead my team better today. I want to have a deeper relationship with my wife today. And that is how communication touches every aspect of what we do, including leadership. And whether you actually have the title of leader or whether you are a leader in a group of people, a team, a family, a nonprofit, an event, whatever that instance of leadership that you have, it makes a huge difference in terms of the success you will have based on your communication skills. Ladies, if you don't have anything else, I'm going to wrap up. I'm going to turn off the recording so we can say our goodbyes. Thank you to everyone who is watching the replay. I hope you found this to be helpful, and I look forward to seeing you next Wednesday at 12 noon Eastern Daylight Time for our next masterclass.